War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 50, the Iranian Revolution in modern Iran. Iran, otherwise known as Persia, is yet another of those ancient lands in and around the Persian Gulf. Iran is the historical name of the region and is a rough permutation of the word Aryan, as the Iranian people identified themselves. Persia as a name for the whole region, and used by much of the Western world, comes from the name of a region in Iran called Pers. Much like Holland is synonymous with the Netherlands, despite being a part of it. Reza Shah requested in 1935 that the West use its, pardon the phrase, preferred noun, and hence the slow transition to the use of Iran internationally. Every country's identity is shaped by the years that preceded it, and Iran more than most. Tragically, I must skip to 1953 and the political struggle between the Shah, or King, of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and his Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. It is one constant of the post-World War II era that any time pro-communist forces overthrow the established government, it is defined as a revolution, and that any time pro-Western forces overthrow the established government, it is called a coup. So too with the 1953 successful defense of the Iranian Constitution. Quite simply, in 1953, Iran was a constitutional monarchy with defined roles for both the chief executive, the Shah, and the chief of the legislature, the prime minister. The previous prime minister was assassinated by a member of the very Shia religiously Fedayeen-e-Islam. The assembly voted to, and the Shah replaced him with Mossadegh, whose National Front Party immediately released the assassin. This joining of socialist, some may say communist with good reason, and hard religious side was a common thread in the post-World War II Iran. United in their hatred of the West in general, and the United States in particular, they often found alliances of convenience, despite their ostensibly mutually exclusive ruling preferences. Mossadegh was a part of the former ruling monarchical family, the Qajar dynasty, whom the Pahlavis replaced as the rulers of Iran in 1925. It was the Qajars who established Tehran, far to the north in the Caucasus, as the 32nd, and for now, final capital of Iran in 1786. They were of Turkic background as opposed to the bulk of the Iranian population. The antipathy between Mossadegh and the Shah was palpable, and Mossadegh felt he and his family name were the rightful rulers of Iran against upstart Pahlavis who had only ruled for less than 30 years, and only because of British support. He sought, at every turn, to usurp power vested in the Shah by the Iranian constitution for the Shah unto himself. The Shah, unwilling to relinquish his constitutional powers, eventually removed Mossadegh as prime minister, with assistance from the United States and Great Britain, who had chafed at the nationalization of Iranian oil facilities at Mossadegh's orders. The British retaliated by placing an embargo on Iranian oil as well as stopping exports to Iran. Mossadegh's alliance with the Iranian Communist Party today, as well as the religious extremists, caused the people to blame the former for the latter's violence. And by 1953, Mossadegh had lost his initial boost of popularity due to Iran's economic woes and instability, caused by Mossadegh's nationalist policies. Mossadegh granted himself emergency powers and began jailing his critics, and the attacks against his enemies were mostly by Tudeh communists. Finally, in an election which is hard to believe is legitimate, Iran held a referendum to dissolve parliament and grant all powers to Mossadegh personally. The vote was 99.9% approved by 2 million voters, or ballot counters, depending on whom you wish to believe. Regardless, at this the Shah and the army fought back and through various mechanisms removed Mossadegh from power. While unquestionably aided by the United States, the fact is Mossadegh had lost his popular mandate, and a great deal of Iranians supported a return to the constitutional monarchy envisioned. On a greater note, the new Eisenhower administration's staunch anti-communist stance was in stark contrast to the more conciliatory stance exhibited by the Truman/Roosevelt administration. Had Mossadegh attempted this in 1952, he probably would have been successful, both due to his higher popularity and the Shah's weaker American and British support at the time. The fact is, in 1953, Iran's prosperity was tied to Britain, and the Soviet Union, while perfectly happy to undermine Western interests, was incapable of substituting the relative prosperity Western alignment brought the Iranian people. But on to 1979 and the rise of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini's Islamic Iran. Khomeini has achieved almost a cult-like following during his life and certainly after his death. His abject hatred of all things Western in general and America in particular predictably earned him Time magazine's Man of the Year award in 1979. His father was murdered when he was only 2 years old, obviously shaping his outlook. Raised by his mother and aunt, at 19 he went to study under the Ayatollah Abdul Karim Harari Yazdi, a Twelver Shia and most obviously the father figure of his life. Some quick explanation of the various honorifics and descriptions. Ayatollah is a title given to high-ranking Twelver Shia clerics. And first off, Twelver might as well be synonymous with all Shia, or Shiite, if you prefer Muslims, as 90% of Shias fall under this group. The 12 refers to the 12 divinely ordained leaders, and the last, Imam al-Mahdi, will reappear as a messianic figure. These 12 imams are infallible, both personally and religiously. The Sunni-Shia divide is driven, theologically speaking, from who was the rightful successor to Muhammad after his death. The first imam is Ali ibn Abi Talib, known colloquially as Ali, who was cousin and son-in-law to Muhammad and considered the first to adopt the faith of Muhammad. Ali is considered by all Muslims as a leader, and Sunnis recognize Ali as the fourth caliph. Notably, Ali is buried in Najaf, Iraq, where Shias comprise a majority of the population, but only Iran has Shia Islam as its state religion. The first 11 imams were all murdered, the vast majority by poisoning, at least by legend. The key point being the idea that they were all betrayed, first and foremost Ali himself, as Abd Allah ibn Abi Quhafa, better known as Abu Bakr, seized the leadership of Islam, and those who supported him and his subsequent rule comprised the Sunni branch of Islam. This original sin is what created the rift between Shia and Sunni, which dominates Middle Eastern politics, outside of Israel, of course, today. 10 years after securing power in 1963, the Shah began what was known as the White Revolution, color revolutions being all the rage then as now. This was a set of reforms trying to redistribute wealth and remove the power of some of the traditional ruling families, as the Shah called it, the elimination of feudalism. Further, this sought privatization of government-owned companies, expanded education for girls and boys, both subsidized and mandatory until age 14, Social Security, national health care, and most controversially, granting women the right to vote. Khomeini was infuriated, and violent protests were organized against the White Revolution, causing the Shah to exile Khomeini to Iraq in 1964. These reforms were massively successful and popular, and education and quality of life increased greatly for the majority of Iranians. However, the privatization of corporations, while enriching everyone, inevitably enriched small groups far more than the majority. Combined with a universal secular education, which had a very modern, if not entirely socialist bent, the White Revolution ironically increased the population most opposed to monarchical rule, an urban working class and an intelligentsia. The Shah's attempt at de-Islamizing Iranian life did nothing to attract the socialists and communist wings of the country, and everything to infuriate the Twelver clergy. In 1976, he changed the calendar from an Islamist-based, where the year zero was Muhammad's Hijr, to the ascension of the throne by Cyrus the Great 1,200 years earlier. The Shah's quiet acquiescence to Israeli victories in 1967 and arguably 1973 angered many in the region. In 1977, Jimmy Carter was elected president, and he was far less inclined to support a monarchy, regardless its pro-Western stance. He forced the Shah into allowing more vocal opposition and giving anti-monarchy voices the freedom to denounce the government, which they did. In 1977, two prominent critics of the Shah died under mysterious circumstances, most notably Khomeini's son. By 1978, religious Iranians were openly rioting, with the Shah's military violently putting them down. The number actually killed is far-ranging, from a few to hundreds. Certainly, exaggerating the dead was all to the benefit of Khomeini. In Shia tradition, memorial services are held 40 days after death, and this created a cycle where every 40 days there was a new round of rioting, violence, death, funerals, and repeat ad nauseum. The Shah was shocked at the level of violence, ignorant to both Iraq and Soviet Union's active support for the revolutionaries. He vacillated between conciliatory gestures or violent repression of the revolution, and he chose the former and got the latter anyway. The Shah promised more elections in 1979. Arrested protesters were tried in civilian courts and immediately released without punishment. Anti-corruption legislation was quickly passed, and in cities where riots occurred, the Shah fired the security forces' leadership. The Iranian military, untrained and unequipped for riot control, were told to not use lethal means, but it was all they had. The Carter administration had refused export of tear gas or rubber bullets, leading inevitably to more deaths. This may have been decided due to the CIA's expert analysis that Iran was not in a revolutionary situation and that the Shah was safe from overthrow. And in fact, Mossadegh's old party, the National Front, penned a letter in support of the Shah. But Khomeini was only emboldened, uniting with the communists he increased the pressure, with more riots and now open violence. On 19 August, 4 men barred the door to a theater and set it on fire, killing 422. Khomeini blamed the Shah, and this message was amplified by the communists. It was later revealed, after the Shah fell, that it was actually Khomeini-led Shia Islamists who did the attack. The Shah's instinct was continued reconciliation and liberalization. Whether this was forced by the Carter administration or the Shah's actual instinct is unknown. What is known was that the forces arrayed would only be placated by his removal from power. The Shah attempted a curfew which was ignored. A gun battle erupted in which dozens of both police and protesters were killed, and Khomeini declared the death of thousands of innocents massacred by, and I quote here, Zionists. Khomeini was still leading the opposition, despite being in Iraq. The Shah asked the Iraqi government to exile him to France, where he became even more popular. Western journalists fell in love with him. The BBC lionized him as an Eastern mystic seeking only to free his people from oppression and colonialism. Eschewing any power for himself, as noted, he was Time magazine's Man of the Year. Sensing the power shift and the complete abandonment of the Shah by both the Carter administration and the West in general, the secular socialists of the National Front flew to Paris and penned an agreement for a democratic and Islamic Iran. The rebels were now openly armed and attacking government forces and targets daily. Anything resembling Western shops, theaters were all looted and burned. Both the American and British embassies were burned as well. The Shah gave orders to not use violence, which only confused his security forces, and emboldened the socialists and Islamists working together to destroy the ruling government and all its auspices. The Shah went on television and all but groveled for forgiveness for his mistakes and promises of further conciliation and reconciliation. He arrested an arbitrary 100 members of his administration for corruption. He released hundreds of protesters and removed the restrictions on street demonstrations. This did nothing but embolden the revolution. Millions flooded the street as the Ayatollahs and National Front leaders marched side by side, demanding the Shah step down. The Carter administration deemed the Ayatollah a spiritual leader who was both moderate and progressive. The American ambassador to Iran, a career Iranian Foreign Service officer, felt that Khomeini was genuinely interested in true democracy for Iran. The Shah was isolated, conflicted, and frankly confused. He appointed a socialist National Front politician, Bakhtiar, as prime minister and left the country with his family, never to return. Khomeini was welcomed back to a rapturous audience, declaring him an imam and demanding his ascension to the throne. As for his National Front allies now ruling, he openly declared, "I shall kick their teeth in. I appoint the government." He replaced Bakhtiar with Mehdi Bazargan from the Religious Party as the new prime minister, and declared that obedience to both Bazargan and himself a religious duty for all Iranians. Khomeini said his government was based in Sharia, and any opposition means opposing Islam itself and a revolt against God. While undoubtedly nearly 2,000 people died in various protests prior to Khomeini's consolidation of power, he claimed 60,000, a number blindly repeated in various Western media outlets. It was an abject lie. Far more were to be killed in the following months, as any deemed too close to the previous Shah were arrested and often executed. While the remnants of the previous government remained, notably the assembly led by Bazargan, the real power was with the Revolutionary Council, made up entirely of Shia clergy and alone responsible for passing laws. The Revolutionary Guard was the muscle, again led by Shia clergy. It was the Ayatollahs' armed force. Only a few months later, even this facade was removed when the American embassy was seized and Bazargan resigned with little fanfare from the obviously disgusted Khomeini. Finally, Khomeini deftly consolidated his power, systematically arresting and executing all socialist, communist, and otherwise secular leaders who helped him gain power. The Iranian Revolution was rightly seen as a massive defeat for the United States, despite the Carter administration's support for the revolution over their nominal ally. Perhaps the U.S. sought to endorse Khomeini as a counter to the socialists, all but admitting the Shah was doomed. In the Cold War, either result was seen as an automatic win for the Soviet Union. But the Khomeini had no time for either. This was the rise of Islamic revolution. The fall of Nasser and his pan-Arab secular socialism to the new pro-American Sadat government in Egypt was another chink in the seemingly bipolar world. No one knew what to make of it. The Sunni monarchies of the Gulf state were very Muslim, but easy to work with. But this was a new creature, and no one was prepared for what would follow. And immediately, that would be the Iran-Iraq War, which we will discuss next week. Thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, please like, subscribe, rate, and comment. Most importantly, share with your friends. Join the conversation at the War 102 subreddit, and check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for links to more information and supporting videos. Send me an email at war102podcast@gmail.com. I look forward to your comments and hope you join us again next week. See you then.